Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Crisis of confidence and credibility. This is how the Munich Security Conference chairman described the current geopolitical situation ahead of the event. As U.S.-Europe relations suffer a multifaceted predicament. We will have more on that story later, but first, the rest of tonight's top stories. The Polish defense minister announces the creation of a high-readiness reserve. The Hungarian opposition vows to make energy independence one of its priorities. And Polish parcel locker giant InPost to change hands in a major deal. 1 year ago, J.D. Vance said that the primary danger to Europe comes from within rather than from external threats. Following that statement, a lot has changed, with Europe taking strides to achieve better security independence. This year in Munich, J.D. Vance will not be there to comment more about the crisis of relations and what we can expect at the Munich Security Conference in Aaron Damon's report.
Wolfgang Ischinger has a lot on his desk. And just days out from leaders descending on Germany, the boss of the mega Munich Security Conference is dishing out a sobering message.
In my view, transatlantic relations are currently experiencing a significant crisis of confidence and credibility.
That line just scratching the surface of the forum's annual security report, which points out that the world has, quote, entered a period of wrecking ball politics, and that sweeping destruction, rather than careful reforms and policy corrections, is the order of the day. It's a tone that threatens another ideological showdown between Europe and America, on the back of US Vice President J.D. Vance's blistering speech last year, in which he blasted the continent over free speech and immigration.
But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
His address triggered transatlantic tremors just a month after Donald Trump had returned to the White House. Now, 365 days later, Vance will not be returning, with Washington's delegation instead led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Until proven otherwise, I am assuming that we can expect the American Secretary of State to talk about American foreign policy, not about issues that do not directly affect his department. At least, that is my expectation.
The Munich Security Conference first originated in 1963 and has a long history of frank debate, most infamously during Vladimir Putin's 2007 address that slammed the post-Cold War system and drew shell-shocked reaction from American senators at the time.
I thought President Putin's comments today were quite provocative and give us all a lot to think about. I thought they were actually disappointing because I had hoped we were beyond that kind of rhetoric.
I thought the speech was very aggressive, but we welcome the dialogue.
Putin's rejection of the European security order is now playing out in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with Volodymyr Zelensky again set to spearhead Kyiv's delegation to Munich, shortly before the 4th anniversary of Moscow's war. In fact, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who did not attend in 2025, is expected to present the laudatory remarks for an award honouring the resolve of the Ukrainian people. At the same time, Wolfgang Ischinger has suggested to a German daily that a ceasefire in Ukraine could increase the threat to NATO's eastern flank, as Putin would rearm. So, does peace appear to be inching any closer?
As Ukrainians say, there is somewhat pressure from Washington to reach a peace deal by the end of spring this year. Even there was a timeline provided by President Zelensky that peace deal could be achieved or a serious breakthrough could be achieved in March this year, next month.
With much at stake over Ukraine, the Middle East and even Greenland, world leaders may well be telling their counterparts tonight, meet me in Munich.
Ukraine is suffering from shortages on all fronts. Civilians see another week of power outages and heat and water supply cuts. Shortages are also affecting the battlefield as Ukrainian troops are running out of ammunition faster than they can replenish their stocks. All that while Russia ruthlessly targets Ukraine, increasing the number of casualties every day. Natalia Komarov brings us up to speed on the latest from Ukraine.
At least one person was killed and 2 wounded in Russia's Monday attack on Odessa. Emergency services in the city rushed to resuscitate a 35-year-old man.
We were already at the scene and carried out resuscitation efforts, but unfortunately the man could not be saved.
Another person was killed by a Shahid drone in the Chernihiv region, and 3 houses burned down in the aftermath of the same attack. This kind of news is what Ukrainians have been waking up to for nearly 4 years now. At the same time, Kyiv residents continue to struggle with no power and no heating amid Russia's relentless campaign of destruction aimed at Ukrainian infrastructure.
Look, this is how we sleep. We pile on 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 blankets. I don't even remember how long we've been living like this. 3 weeks, maybe a month.
On the front lines, the situation is also dire. Ukrainian forces report running out of ammunition faster than their partners can deliver.
Hi.
The spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force confirmed to the Financial Times that many Patriot systems stay idle due to a lack of missiles.
To be very honest, and it's sad to say so, but the Western world has failed to help Ukraine push back this brutal, criminal and illegal aggression, right? We just gave Ukraine enough to survive.
Now, US President Donald Trump has set a new deadline for peace in Ukraine, June of this year. However, as proven by last week's talks in Abu Dhabi, neither Kyiv nor Moscow seem any more willing to compromise than they were 4 years ago. And so, Ukraine fights on. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Poland's professional military and its Territorial Defence Forces will now have another leg to stand on. Minister of Defence Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz has announced a creation of a high-readiness reserve of volunteers to undergo professional training. If successful, the project will see Poland boast a 500,000-strong military force by 2039. Laura Hazanow reports.
Military exercises are underway at the training ground of the Braniewo Armored Cavalry Brigade, where Polish tank crews are practicing on the Army's newest equipment. The brigade is now boasting the South Korean K2 Black Panthers, while another delivery of the US Abrams tanks has just arrived in the country to bolster Poland's armor units. But as the armed forces are upgrading and overhauling their equipment, Poland is also changing how it prepares civilians for potential war, introducing a new reserve strategy designed to keep these forces ready for combat.
The year 2026 will for us be the year of reserves, and it will see considerable changes to our military reserve pool. Our ambitions envision an army of 500,000, with a major part of the figure made up by what we are now calling high-readiness reserve personnel.
The High Readiness Reserve will consist of trained reservists who take part in regular exercises and can reinforce line units within days if needed. Participation is fully voluntary and open to both women and men. Military units across the Polish armed forces will be divided into 3 readiness tiers. High readiness reservists will serve alongside professional soldiers within first-tier units, which must be ready for deployment within 5 to 7 days and undergo at least 8 days of training every year, including rapid mobilization checks. The remaining units will have longer mobilization timelines and rely mainly on so-called permanent readiness reservists. The new system includes pay for training, access to specialist courses, flexible training schedules, and freedom to choose units to serve with. The Defense Ministry also plans to open reserve officer schools, allowing civilians to earn an officer rank while remaining outside full-time military service. Simultaneously, Poland will also launch the next edition of last year's civilian defense training program.
We launched the pilot for the In Readiness program last year and opened applications online which were readily submitted by a considerable number of citizens. Over 18,000 registered in the program and 16,000 completed their training. We're very glad to see high interest in subsequent military service.
As before, participants will be able to choose between 4 8-hour modules: basic crisis safety training, survival skills, first aid, and cybersecurity.
It's training in survival, it is a training in medical aid, it is a training in knowing what is disinformation in the internet. But of course, this is a basis for military training. So a military training is a bit higher for the civilians that want to serve in the military reserve.
These latest initiatives come as Poland continues to cope with the demographic crisis, stretching its current reserves pool. For TVP World, Laura Hazanow.
The fallout that followed the release of the Epstein files is taking down the political and social elites of Europe, but the full extent of the scandal is yet to be known. From the UK all the way to Norway and Slovakia, investigations and resignations are taking place. Alex Cadier has more on the extent of the damage in his latest report.
Well, the British Prime Minister is fighting for his political life because of the fact that he knew about the potential links between his ambassador for the United States, Lord Mandelson, and the convicted sex offender and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, a member of the British royal family, was stripped of his titles and unceremoniously booted out of the royal lodge where he lived by his brother, King Charles III. We have seen the Norwegian royal family, the Swedish royal family, implicated with links, some before Jeffrey Epstein's conviction, some after. A former Norwegian Prime Minister also being investigated by the police for his links with the disgraced financier and sex offender. So clearly, this is sending shockwaves across Europe. We have seen the National Security Advisor in Slovakia losing his job as well. Now, not all of these people are facing any kind of criminal investigation, but certainly for those in public life, a real blemish on their record. Comparatively, in the United States, for example, less of an impact for those still in power. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick had said he had never spoken to or seen Jeffrey Epstein since 2005. Documents released by the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. suggest that was not true. Clearly, links with Jeffrey Epstein are sending an earthquake through Europe's political class. More may be released in future, but certainly, clearly, shockwaves across Europe because of ties to Jeffrey Epstein. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
Ahead of the April parliamentary elections, the opposition to Prime Minister Orban's Fidesz, the TISA party, led by Peter Modzior, published a lengthy manifesto outlining its major priorities, including a strong focus on energy policy. This aligns with the EU scheme to become independent of all Russian energy sources. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney reports on TISA's plan of action.
With 62 days before the Hungarian elections on April 12, we now know the economic priorities of Peter Modzior and his TISA party.
TISA equals zero tolerance for corruption, bringing back EU funds and kick-starting the economy. Fidesz equals stealing, stirring up hatred and lying.
He's made two key pledges, adopting the euro and ending Russian energy imports to restore Hungary's moribund economy.
Hungary is going down economically, the inflation is getting higher and higher, energy prices are really high, and that is what people feel every day.
TISA's manifesto claims Hungary could sign up to the Maastricht mechanism, a key condition for joining the Eurozone by 2030. It also states that Hungary's dependence on Russian energy supplies could end by 2035.
It's doable. In case of Hungary, of course, they have a lot of economic problems, but some of those problems can be fixed.
Like its neighbours Poland, the Czech Republic and Romania, Hungary has its own national currency, the forint, but it's experienced significant volatility over the last 5 years.
Hungarian forint was performing really poorly in recent years, and that includes huge inflation in recent times. That euro is let's say, almost universally popular in Hungary.
Ending Hungary's dependence on Russian energy may be harder to sell to voters. 80% of its supply comes from Russia. Prime Minister Viktor Orban views cutting this supply as a threat to national security.
Those who work to cut Hungary off from affordable energy violate our core interests. Let's be clear, Ukraine is positioning itself not as an opponent, but as an enemy of Hungary.
Orban's campaign is predicated on cheap energy supplies from Russia. Can Hungary be weaned off this politically toxic teat by 2035?
I think it's very realistic. In my view, even earlier we can get rid of the Russian energy resources. Look at Poland at the moment, or at Czech Republic. I've got information that the Hungarian energy giant, MOL, is starting to look for other resources.
According to Politico, TISA is already 11% ahead of Orbán's Fidesz party in the polls. By February 21st, when the election campaign officially kicks off, we'll have a better idea of the popularity of TISA's economic policy. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
If you need it, they send it. InPost, one of Poland's largest parcel locker operators, is set to change hands in what is dubbed one of the country's biggest corporate deals in recent years. The parcel locker and courier service provider, despite its international reach, is eyeing even greater expansion across Europe, hence moving on with the transaction. Konrad Gorlinski brings us the details.
InPost, an innovator in the so-called last-mile B2C logistics business that skyrocketed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange to become one of the country's great unicorns, will be changing hands. Founder and CEO Rafał Brzoska posted on X on Monday that InPost Group will be sold to a consortium of international investors in a deal expected to be finalized in the second half of 2026. The value of the deal? €7.8 billion. Buyers are set to include large multinationals, FedEx Corporation, Advent Investment, A&R Investments, and PPF Group, though Brzoska assures that InPost will retain operational independence. Its headquarters, management team, and key operations will remain in Poland while he continues to lead the group.
We shouldn't look at this from the perspective of change, from the perspective of the ownership change and the capital moving from one country to another. It's a normal stage of development for each company.
Currently, the company's stock is trading in Frankfurt at around €13.35. The consortium of buyers has agreed to purchase all the shares at €15.60 per share. InPost's board chairman said he's confident that the offer represents an attractive opportunity for shareholders to realize value at significant premium. Shareholders mostly agree.
We need to take into consideration that the bid and the proposal from the buyers is still strongly above the market price. So this is the positive information for the current shareholders. And the bid is above 20% to the current price.
Brzoska has given assurances that the consortium will back initiatives to deepen partnerships across the entire value chain and has committed itself to supporting InPost's continued expansion across Europe, including in France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Benelux countries, and the United Kingdom, the continent's largest e-commerce market. For TVP World, I'm Konrad Gorlinski.
With the Munich Security Conference around the corner and the discussions on the safety and security of Europe in the context of the transatlantic cooperation, it is my pleasure to welcome here my guest, Rose Gottemoeller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, to discuss the latest. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with the Munich Security Conference. It is right around the corner, and in the latest security report published on the website of the event, we read, quote, "The world has entered a period of wrecking ball politics. Sweeping destruction is the order of the day." Are we expecting another showdown between Europe and the US? Maybe there is something brewing, or perhaps this is over for now.
I don't think it's over for now, but the process is underway. I don't actually expect any wrecking ball politics at the Munich Security Conference because everybody knows what the situation is now. We are in a time of radical change. The United States is occupying other space, so to say, focusing on the Western Hemisphere and on Latin America, also focusing on the Indo-Pacific. The leadership of the Trump administration's already been abundantly clear that Europe is going to have to fend for itself. And for that reason, I don't expect any new shocks to the system, although I suppose there can be some new demands about Greenland, but we know that's a tough negotiation already underway. But I do expect that there will be a lot of soul searching going on and a lot of conversation among among Europeans as to how they take up the leadership mantle that the United States is setting aside.
So we know that Vice President J.D. Vance is not going to make an appearance during the conference in Munich, but we know that Marco Rubio is going to head the delegation from the U.S. Do you think there's going to be any response from the U.S. delegation when it comes to the changes that were introduced over the past 12 months when it comes to European defense?
I'm sure it will be a time for Marco Rubio. He is the National Security Advisor as well as the Secretary of State, so he has a very important role working very closely with President Trump. So he will be bolstering the messages that the president has been delivering loud and long to the NATO allies, that they really need to spend more on their own defense. They need to take more responsibility for their own security. I do want to point out, though, that these messages are not new. When I was Deputy Secretary General of NATO in the period of Trump's first term in office, he was shocking the allies at that time with his promises not to fulfill Article 5 commitments under the NATO founding treaty if the allies in Europe did not pay up. So there is a continuation. Obviously, I think the president is satisfied that at the Hague summit last summer, the allies signed up to 5% of GDP on defense and related infrastructure. So that's a good development from his point of view, but I think there will be a continuing sharp emphasis on Europe defending itself.
Let's take a look at the conference and the developments of the last 12 months from the European perspective, because over that period of time, we've seen defense spending commitments from European countries. But are European countries, in your opinion, taking the threat coming from Russia seriously? And would Europe be able to defend itself if Russia decided to strike?
I believe that the NATO alliance would be able to defend itself if Russia should decide to strike militarily on the up and up with an overt attack. That is something that NATO is well prepared for. And frankly, the Russians are weakened now by their now almost 4 years of war in Ukraine. And they've lost a good deal of armor. They've lost many, many people, as we know, over 1 million by some accounts. So I think the Russian armed forces are weakened. It'd be a foolhardy moment for them to aggressively strike against NATO Europe. But the thing we worry about nowadays, and Poland knows this very, very well, are the hybrid attacks, the infrastructure attacks, the drone incursions into European airspace, the constant cyber attacks. These are things that I think that Russia will continue to perpetrate and even intensify. And so it will be important for NATO Europe to be alert and to develop its strength, its resilience against such hybrid attacks.
I would like us to take a moment to listen to Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz, who is the strategic advisor to the chief of the Polish General Staff. He spoke to Aaron Damon on one of our shows On the Record. So let's have a listen.
Are you saying that when it comes to the backup plan, there are backup plans that Poland is making in the event that America would not turn up to help?
It's natural. I mean, you always, don't discuss the details, but you always have, different plans shelved that if anything happens, depending on how the situation unfolds, you pull out this particular plan or branch plan, and then you adjust it to the situation. It's always good, as we all know, to have a plan, and if necessary, use it. But again, I have no doubts that the U.S. will be with us if bad things happen.
So this was Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz, and he has no doubt that the U.S. would stand up to the challenge if, for example, the eastern flank of NATO was to be attacked. Do you think that the U.S. is still a reliable security provider in this part of the world?
I refer you to the national security strategy and the national defense strategy that the Trump administration has issued. In both those documents, there is a recommitment of the United States to the defense of Europe. But once again, the emphasis is on Europe taking more responsibility and being better prepared, better armed, and better trained to take more defense responsibility itself. So the United States is going to continue to be involved. There's no question about it. But I do think it will be a different involvement going forward with a lot of the requirement for planning, preparedness, training, and certainly modernization of conventional forces on the shoulders of the European countries. But I do not expect the United States to walk away from Europe. It's just going to be a different emphasis and one where the Europeans are expected to exercise more leadership.
In the same conversation with Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz, we also heard something that we've reported here on TVP World weeks ago about the boots on the ground, the U.S. boots on the ground when it comes to NATO and their presence, when it comes to numbers being diminished. So how is Europe going to maintain that relationship between the U.S. And the continent when it comes to learning new tactics? What do you think is going to be the solution here?
Yes, I think it's really important to keep in perspective how the numbers are perhaps being reduced somewhat. And there's another point here, and that is the U.S. Congress has very strong bipartisan support for NATO, both the senators and in the House of Representatives. And so I think there will be certain braking functions on how much the United States could withdraw from Europe, either in terms of troops or equipment, material, and weapon systems. So bear that in mind. There are some strong constraints being placed on the executive branch by the U.S. Congress. So that's one point. But the other point is I think that there was a strong buildup of U.S. troop numbers after the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and then redoubled again in 2022. Certainly, again, while I was at NATO 10 years ago, U.S. troop numbers were coming up in NATO. But if they are to be reduced, it would be, I believe, to a number that is not dissimilar to what was in NATO a decade or so ago. So not a radical shift, not a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops by any means, but perhaps, yes, some downsizing.
I would like us to take a moment to take a look at the expiry that took place, an important date on the 5th of February. Given your role as the chief U.S. negotiator for the New START, how much more dangerous is this world now that this agreement has expired last week?
I want to be clear for your viewers that the New START treaty was going to go out of force no matter what. There was no opportunity for this treaty to be further extended in a legal way. Vladimir Putin did propose last September to have an informal kind of political agreement to extend the limits of New START for another year in order to negotiate a new treaty. President Trump declined that offer. But at the same time, the reporting that I read out of Abu Dhabi last week, it seems that both the Trump administration and the Kremlin, the Putin administration, plan to engage in new talks. And for the time being, they're saying that pretty much the status quo will continue. So to make a long story short, I do not believe that there will be a quick and radical buildup of nuclear weapons either on the U.S. or Russian side. It is a dangerous moment right now because we have no treaty in force. I am heartened slightly by the fact that both Russia and the United States say they want to get back to talks and negotiate a new treaty. So let's see what happens. But at the moment, I think we really also must focus on China and the rapid Chinese nuclear modernization. The Chinese have not told us what their objectives are for that buildup, and that is what so worries the United States. The United States is concerned it's going to have two nuclear peers to deal with, China and Russia, and how does the United States deal with them alone?
Perhaps strengthening the nuclear deterrent in Europe wouldn't be such a bad idea. Our time on the show is coming to an end. However, Madam Secretary, I wanted to ask you a final question. Do you have faith that the NATO alliance can survive the Trump administration?
I absolutely do. If anything, I see that the spines are being stiffened in NATO Europe by the fact that the Trump administration is attacking NATO so constantly, attacking it with words, with arguments, and really pushing certain efforts on the alliance, such as building up defense industries in Europe. By the way, I think these efforts are needed. I was listening attentively to your previous reporting. I think it's good that NATO European countries are thinking hard about how to improve and modernize defense industries and really undertake the conventional force modernization that needs to happen. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining me on the program. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Rose Gottemoller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, was my guest. And so this marks the end of World News tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here for more news and features in just a moment. Good night.